Arts. Do all of you know each other? Have you met each other before? Elena, have you met Roz and you've met Mary Pat and Susie?
I do not think I have met Roz or Susie. Well, maybe if I saw what Susie looks like, I would say, but
Okay,
but
let's do this.
hi. Hi,
Hello, we're
Roz
going to give
and Susie.
Hello, Elena.
Hi.
wonderful. Thank you for coming. And Mary Pat, my co-leader, will now introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Mary Pat Ost. And I wanted to just set up a little community norms. And let's see. So really what we want to be able to do is to have a respectful conversation. Understand the impact of words. If you are offended or uncomfortable, let us know. You can text or chat, use the chat to chat with either Carol or I. Or you can also just say it out loud. Limit distractions, bring your full self to the conversation. Raise your hand to be recognized. Try to limit your comments to 2 minutes, but because this is a small group, we're going to try and stick with that. If you're not speaking, mute yourself. And if you can, for those who don't have video, share your name before your comment. And then if you can, keep your comments nonpartisan. I want to know if there's any of these that you would like to modify, if there's anything you'd like to add or delete, just so we can have some community norms here. All right.
Okay. Mary Pat, I still hear some background noise. Do you hear it? It's like a radio.
Let me, Rosalind, I'm going to mute you.
Good. Okay. I think that got it. All right. And Mary Pat, would you like to talk about
Yeah, so today what we're going to do is just welcome and introductions. Then we're going to talk about the goals and the process of the U.S. and local league studies. We'll talk about key terms that will be used, and hopefully you will have gone through those documents. If you haven't, if you look down in your lower toolbar, there is the 3 little dots, and it says meeting. Let's see. There were documents attached to the meeting, so it should be under that more. Then we're going to talk about the hierarchy, the language that's used by the league, of issues, principles, and positions. And then we're going to spend some time just having a discussion about the 2 issues that were sent from the league on financial disclosure and then stare decisis. And then what's next? What would you expect to have happen next week? So we can go to the next slide.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
are the documents that you're referring to that are supposed to be attached to this, are they different than the ones that we were sent or
No.
that we could? Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
Same
Because
document.
I don't see anything that I can
Yeah, they were there a few
open.
minutes ago, and now I don't know where they went.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
here
thought
they are.
maybe it was
They're under meeting info.
Hmm.
And you'll see there's 3 attachments. So
Is that under the more
no,
3
sorry,
dots?
it's under the one next to it that's meeting info.
I don't seem to have that.
Okay, well then never mind.
That was easy.
But I did see the
Get
other
the other ones.
ones, yeah.
Then you've got it.
Yeah.
All right.
So what we want to do now is just brief introductions, your name, and how long you've been involved or been a league member, and then we'll get started.
Okay. Who will go first, Mary Pat?
Well, I'll go first. Mary
Uh-huh.
Pat Ost. I've been a league member since August, and I'm honored to be here today to do this work. And
Okay.
I'm going to hand it off to Rosalind.
Good. Does she need help on unmuting Mary Pat? Can you unmute her?
See.
There,
I
now
can
I'm
do this.
unmuted.
There you go.
Okay, so I'm Rosalind Painter-Goffey. I'm a relatively new member. I think I joined in spring of last year. I very much enjoyed the experience of helping with the forums. It was my first taste of league work. And I'm very interested in how a study works, which is why I decided to volunteer for this. And that's me.
Great, welcome. You get to pick the next person.
Well, can I go? Because I'm at a stoplight.
Sure.
This is Susie Murray. I've been a member for a year. I just took the leadership empowerment class, so I've learned a lot about how the league works. And I heard about this and decided to sign up, although the times were going to mean I was driving and in North Carolina. But whatever, I'm going to give it a shot.
Okay, well, welcome. And
Thanks.
Elena.
Hi, Elena Visvari. I have been with the league for probably 7 years or so, give or take a few months. I've been on the board of directors for a while, and I have co-chaired the events committee for a long time. And I really, this is kind of this seems very legalese to me, but, interesting to get to understand how the league processes information and does a study and all of that. I mean, I've heard some of this as, again, I've served on the board and been a member, but to actually be part of this is just kind of interesting. So thank you for setting this up.
Yes, we're all learning this together. So,
Mary Pat, am I the last then?
Yeah.
I'm Carol Hartz, and I've been with the league about the same time as Elena. I think we joined about the same time. I joined in 2017. Okay. Next slide, Mary Pat.
Yep. That's
And
you.
this is me. And now we're actually getting into the study and the goals of the federal judiciary study. I think most of you are aware that LWV US and LWV Florida flip-flop years in having a convention. LWV US last met in a convention format in 2024. And at that time, they voted for a one-year study of the federal judiciary. This study is being done, I will say, in fast time. In the past, most studies have taken the league 2 years. This one is slated for 1 year. I don't know if that's because of advancements in technology or because of the need for a position by the league. Perhaps it's both, but the results of this study will be reported in June of this year. There are about 750 local leagues. Each one of them is invited to respond to exactly the same questions that we're responding to. My guess is that not all leagues will participate, but still 750 is a big number. So surely hundreds of leagues will participate in the same thing that we are. The local leagues will report the results to LWVUS, who will compile our responses and then formulate a position to be presented or positions to be presented in June of 2025. I just want to point out that all of you have made, I think, the central point, which is I began in the league in 2017. Elena, I don't know about you. I have never been a participant in a league study at any level. And I don't recall that our chapter has been a participant since Ann Hardy was president back in 2014. So we really have a dual purpose here. We want to respond to LWVUS. We don't need to be lawyers. The point is, even though it comes across as very legalistic, that's not the point of getting our responses. The point is to get common wisdom, the wisdom of the citizen in terms of this study. But it's also a chance for our league to learn how to do a study. This is almost a pilot project. We may not do it perfectly, but with your comments, we can do it better next time. So that's part of why we're on here. Any comments? Joyce is coming in to join us. Any comments on what we've said so far? Okay.
Great.
Now, you notice that there were terms that you were asked to, I'm going to use the word skim over. I skimmed those terms. If you asked me about any one of them, I don't think I could pass the test. But the point of having you read those terms was to know that there are common legal definitions of some of the things that we're studying, many of them. And if we get confused about what we're talking about, we can go to those legal terms as a first source of information. Those definitions are not particularly league definitions, they're accepted legal definitions. And there was one of them that I found was really important, and that is, what is the scope of our work? And in this study, we are responding to questions about the federal judiciary. Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution authorizes the creation of the U.S. federal court system to include one Supreme Court and such inferior courts, courts reporting to them, that Congress chooses to establish. That's the scope of this study. So we're not talking about Florida state courts. We're not talking about juvenile justice courts. We're talking about the Supreme Courts and those appellate and other courts whose decisions can trickle up to the Supreme Court. Just one aside, I remember, Mary Pat, I see you want to add something in. When I was in like 6th grade, our teacher taught us that the reason that the Supreme Court was not bound to the same standards of reporting, of fiduciary duty, of whatever, as other courts was because it was the highest in the land, the most respected court, and in her view, when I was in the 6th grade, should be responsible for, I'll use the word policing, although that's not the right word, but taking care of its own business in terms of ethics, finances, whatever. So the Supreme Court is different in terms of the rules that it operates under. And that may be one reason that this study is focused on the Supreme Court and its inferior courts. Mary Pat?
Yeah, I just want to add that in some of the materials, and if you have the issues or impact on issues, the league positions, the book that has the league positions, they already have a position statement on the executive branch and on the legislative branch. So this rounds out the 3 branches of government in doing this at the federal level. So it just ties a bow around everything.
Right.
Elena.
So there's never been a position paper before from the league on the federal judiciary. Is that what I'm
Correct.
surmising then? Okay.
Other comments or questions? Joyce, nice to have you with us. We can't hear or see you, Joyce, and it's up to you whether you choose to turn those functions on. Oh, good. There you are. Welcome, Joyce. Good to see you. Okay. Now, there are other terms that are coming from the league. And I want to talk with you about some of the terms that are coming from the league, just so we can know what those are. And those are issues, principles, and positions. And I wanted to give you an example of how the league uses those terms, because that's going to be critical in our responding to those studies. We are going to be commenting about issues, looking at issues through the lens of our principles, and commenting on positions. Okay. The example I chose was the issue violence prevention, because it's familiar to me as a past gun safety chair. It's the issue I'm probably most comfortable with. The principles that the League of US has outlined to look at gun violence prevention through, it's a lens, it's a way of viewing. The principles that the League has outlined are the general interest and welfare of the community and individual constitutional rights. So the League looks at issues of gun violence prevention through these two lenses. Now, here's a pretty easy question. Do you think these two principles support one another, or is there tension between these two principles? Elena?
I think there's tension between them
Why do you say that?
because somebody could say that my individual constitutional rights are more important than the general interest and welfare of the community, or the other way around too. It could be that somebody is very adamant that we need to look at the whole community and make it, and consider the general interest. And I'm willing to then, put my individual constitutional rights behind that or on the back burner of that.
Yes, exactly on point, Elena. Yes, Roz.
I was just going to support what Elena just said, that there is that tension that exists between these two principles. So
Yes,
just agreeing.
absolutely right. And the League's position comes as no surprise when you look at the principles that the League has articulated. Roz, can you read this screen for me, please, and read me the League's position on gun
Yes.
safety?
LWVUS supports regulations on the purchase, ownership, and use of handguns that balance individual constitutional rights with the general interest and welfare of the community.
Right. Now, just as on a personal note, I will note it in Sarasota County in roughly 2020, the county commission wanted to vote or put on its agenda a vote on a non-binding resolution to make Sarasota County a gun sanctuary county. In other words, to say that it supported the Second Amendment, to hold the right to bear arms, and that if you cross the Sarasota County border, the county would support your right to have a firearm. Some of the simplest ideas are the most profound. I spoke in front of the county commission and said the League believes in balancing individual constitutional rights with the general interest and welfare of the community. The non-binding resolution that you are proposing tips the scale in favor of individual rights. I can't say that that's what swayed the county commission. Some of them looked horrified at that, some of them nodded, but the non-binding resolution was defeated. And I felt that the League's very clear position and statement of principle made a very persuasive argument in front of the county commission. Okay, Mary
Can I
Pat?
make a comment?
Yes, please.
See if this is relevant. In Pennsylvania, our governor needed an organ replacement, and they put him at the top of the list, and the citizens rebelled and said that he had no right to be placed on top of the list for an organ replacement. And I kind of felt that it was in the benefit of the community as a whole to have him be healthy and get that replacement. But a lot of people felt that it was the individual, that they were waiting in line and that they should have their right to be ahead of the governor.
Hmm.
Is that the same? Is that speaking to the same principle?
What do the rest of you think? Any comments?
Well, I'm thinking, yeah, the governor is very important and critical to the state. However, there are set ways so that if something happens to the governor, then there are people that will take over that have either been elected or not, that there's a lineage and, you know, a power that goes on. So I think, in my opinion, I would probably disagree with Joyce's opinion.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think it's interesting. You know, so much of what we deal with in the league has to do with competing principles. Joyce, I think what you raised might be an interesting topic. I wish we had time to talk more about it, but it's interesting to look at what issues do pit rights against one another.
Okay, thank you. I thought it was relevant, however, to the discussion.
Okay. Mary Pat, financial disclosure.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment. I think you'd have to look at the organ procurement, you know, what are their principles around organ donation, and the list, you know, those agencies function under pretty strict guidelines, which we all know people can get around. But I think if that would be my first place to look, is what are the guidelines from the organ procurement agency, and does that decision align with that guidance from that agency? So we are now going to dive into one of the two issues that you all received on the financial disclosure requirements for federal judges and justices. And it says federal judges and justices should be subject to rigorous financial disclosure requirements, enforcements, and penalties for all financial benefits, including but not limited to income, gifts, paid speaking engagements, and book deals. So just off the top of your head, before we ever get to the questions, what are your thoughts about this? Your initial reaction? Rosalind?
I would say that I totally support this. I think in times past, there was not such a need to have things spelled out so clearly and succinctly, but I think the times we live in are changing, and we can't trust that individual judges and justices are going to answer things clearly. Even with these financial disclosure requirements, I personally feel that they find ways to get around things. And if these are the people who are deciding what's going to happen to the rest of us through their interpretation of the laws, I just think they need to be held to a really high standard. And if the only way we can, clarify or accept that standard is for this kind of reporting. So that's the way I feel about it.
Why do you think, and not just for the group, why do you think the Supreme Court in particular has separated itself in their code of conduct, financial disclosure area, has separated itself from the rest of the federal judiciary in what those standards are.
Well, I think that for the longest time, they held themselves separate because of what we learned at the beginning of this PowerPoint, and that is that because they were the Supreme Justice, they decided everything, that they would hold themselves to a certain standard. And so I think they continue to feel that way. But I think in modern times, I don't think that they've proven themselves worthy of not being held to a standard by something else. But I think that's why I think they think that, I don't want to use the word above the law, but they are the law. And so that's why they don't need this, they say.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Now we'll get to the next slide. So two of the questions that
Susie's got her hand up.
oh, I'm sorry, Susie. Go ahead, Susie.
Sorry, this is really hard to do on my phone.
Yeah.
I have stopped driving and I'm going in the house, and so I'll log off and back on my computer. But I I do think that they've taken license with this. They've been asked to financially disclose and have not been honest, and I think that raises doubts about their transparency. I think that's the real issue. It should be transparent what's going on. I'm not saying they aren't allowed to be paid to speak. Everyone gets paid to speak, but they should be transparent about how much they're being paid, and so we could evaluate if it's equivalent to what, I don't know, some actor would be given. Or I guess that's my opinion. It should be transparent.
Rosalind.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think one of the things that we've always firmly believed about the Supreme Court, especially, is that they are nonpartisan, that they are objective, that they look at things from a very learned judicial understanding. And I think that when it comes to disclosing all of these different things that they have, if they're not doing them, then how can we trust that they're interpreting the law fairly and accurately? So I think it's all kind of bound up in that trust that we have in this organization, that they themselves are the epitome of trustworthiness. And then we can trust that when they come to a decision about a law, that they've done it properly and they're not influenced by outside parties or suggestions. And when they don't disclose something, and then we say, what does that particular party or does that particular organization have some undue influence on a judge, so that then they would come to their decision not based on the law but on outside influences.
Yeah. So let's just morph into this first question. And this information on the Code of Conduct for Justices was included in the little brief that we got. But is the recently adopted Code of Conduct for Justices, in which they confirmed that they would comply voluntarily with regulations, sufficient? What I'm hearing from you all is a tendency towards maybe no, but I don't want to put those words in your mouth. Elena.
I would say no, because kind of just what we talked about. I mean, and we've seen where there have been times when things have not been disclosed, and even though they were supposed to be disclosed. So if it's going to be totally voluntary, I suspect there's going to be a lot of things left in the dark, or we're going to be left in the dark about what happened. So I I think, yeah, it needs to be stronger than just voluntary.
Any other thoughts about that? Go ahead, Rosalind.
Sorry, I have a lot to say, I think, but
That's okay.
I guess I think that, they agreed to this code of ethics that they would voluntarily comply, because I think that they have a sense that the American public is concerned about things. But still, I agree with Elena. I don't think that they continue. I don't think that they volunteer everything. And so, and I also think that it's not everybody. I think that there are certain bad actors who are bringing this upon everybody. It's usually the way things happen. But I don't think that this particular code of conduct is sufficient. And the other thing is, how do we even know like what they do and don't report? I mean, I guess investigative reporters start digging and find all these things to be able to say, no, you didn't report everything. And I think that sets up.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that sets up a bad precedent too.
Mm-hmm. So there are actually databases where that information gets reported, I think twice a year. At least it does for Congress. And I believe I read in the Stock Act that it is for the judges as well. But one of the things that was presented in the brief that we got is that the code is consistent with the voluntary compliance, but there's no teeth to it. Mm-hmm. So I don't, what is the accountability part of it? Who's overseeing that? How is it enforced? That is missing from that code of conduct. And what kind of oversight do you think needs to happen?
That's a great question, Mary Pat. As as we get rid of more and more organizations, extra government, quasi-government organizations charged with making sure that the right things happen, who is the decider of whether the justices are in compliance? But maybe the next question is, should we, do we make regulations, do we withhold regulation because of fear that that regulation will get in the wrong hands?
Can you explain that?
Well, I'm talking about, Elena, perhaps I'm bringing in, you mean explain what I'm saying?
What you just said, yeah.
Yeah.
Regulations in the wrong hands.
If we get rid of people such as the ethics compliance people in the government, who normally are not elected and who normally do not take a party position, if we say that their position is wasteful of taxpayers' money or has a particular point of view, so we get rid of what has been in place, who has the authority to say somebody is non-compliant and to punish them for being non-compliant? Is it a political party? Is it a president? Is it the Congress? I think that's what Mary Pat was getting to. Who's got the responsibility to make sure that other people who serve government do the right things? Am I making sense? You look like maybe not.
Yeah, yes, I see what that means. You said something about bad regulators or bad regulations, and so that kind of threw me off. But I'm just putting that aside and understanding that at this point there are some nonpartisan and excuse me, ways to examine what people disclose, et cetera, and you know, the ethics committee and all of that. So if that goes away, what takes their place? You know, if there is no nonpartisan component at all, you know, what is there? So yes, what's the who handles that accountability?
Right. That's it. And beautifully said. That's really it. I was getting some bad feedback, Mary Pat.
Yeah,
It
me
just
too.
stopped. Okay. All right.
Rosalind.
Yeah, you know, when they were initially putting in this code of conduct, I think it was several years ago. Does anybody else remember that maybe they had floated the idea that a retired Supreme Court justice could be the overseer of those justices, which to me might be help instill some trust, because it was one of their members who understood the kind of the tribulations of the work, but who could still be forthcoming and say, have you included everything, and kind of worked with people. And I that's the only kind of overseer that I could really see for the Supreme Court. But I think you're right when you say there has to be someone who's going to hold them accountable, because the sense is that they're not holding themselves accountable.
Right. Thank you.
And you know, and then I love that idea, but I'm just thinking, as the court has become rather partisan, how does then, you know, that person would have to meet standards too, that overseer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe artificial intelligence eventually. No, don't laugh. I think it could get to that point,
Yeah.
but that's in the future.
Rosalind, you get the last word here.
Okay, well, I was just thinking that the 9 justices who are currently serving among themselves could select the judge that they wanted to be the retired judge to be their overseer, so that they would all be in agreement this is a person they could trust and that they felt would be forthcoming with them. And I mean, it's just an idea, but again, I think it would show the seriousness of the court's desire to be honest and transparent.
Yeah.
But
That's a great suggestion.
Yep.
I'd go for it.
So I just want to point out, if you go back to the issue brief that we got, how they then take this kind of discussion and this kind of issue and say, well, here's the principles that we believe that this falls under. And this is judicial independence, accountability, transparency, ethics, legitimacy, and impartiality and fairness. So I think that our discussion has covered that broadly. And so then they would take these principles, as Carol was saying, and that's when they would develop a position. Carol, you're up.
Yeah, that really says it. I'm so glad you brought that up, Mary Pat, because the idea of judicial independence, who's monitoring the judges, is seems very important. Okay, Mary Pat, between you and me, we agreed that we would go get ready staging for next week around 10:50. So I it's 10:43 now. I think that gives us 7 minutes for the discussion to come.
Yeah, and I think we're probably okay with a minute or two.
That's fine. Good. Okay. So the next discussion, the second discussion, is I think a fascinating topic, and that is stare decisis, which means in Latin to stand by things decided in similar cases. And Elena, would you read the little blurb about stare decisis, please?
Yeah. Stability of the law comes from adherence to precedent, which promotes even-handed, predictable, and consistent development of legal principles, fosters reliance on judicial decisions, and contributes to actual and perceived integrity of the judicial process.
Wonderful. Okay. Stare decisis. This might be a difficult question. It was for me before I started reading this stuff, but can anybody bring up one of the cases historically where stare decisis has played a very high visibility role? I'll give you a hint. It had to do with the school system and equity in the school system. Anybody?
Susie?
Sorry, I was gonna say Roe versus Wade. I don't remember the one you're talking about.
Okay, Roe versus Wade is certainly one of them. That's one of the two examples I was thinking of, and the other, Roz, is your hand up?
Yeah, it is. Brown versus the Board of Education.
Wonderful. These are two different views of stare decisis. In Brown versus the Board of Education, the doctrine of separate but equal, which had stood and had been decided in a similar case, was overturned. In Roe versus Wade, the right under the federal rights to choose was overturned and given to the states. So these were two examples where stare decisis had a tremendous impact, one way or the other, in decisions making, in decisions in the courts. There are 4 ways that stare decisis can be overturned. And before we look at these 4 ways, I want to comment that in our readings, we saw that one way that stare decisis can be put to the side is if, for example, Roe versus Wade came to the courts and the courts said, this decision is not similar. The decision we're being asked for today is not similar to the prior case. It's different because of X, Y, and Z. If the courts say that, if these cases are not similar, then the court is not bound by stare decisis because the cases are not the same. Does that make sense to everybody? The precedent would not apply to the current case. Okay, so 4 ways in which stare decisis can be overturned is if the circumstances change, there were legal errors in the previous decision, there was an unworkable precedent in the previous decision. Can anybody give me an example of what an unworkable precedent might be, even if it's a silly example? No gamblers in the group? Anybody willing to be wrong? Okay. Susie, you look like you're thinking. All right, I'll take a stab at being wrong. Suppose a previous court case had said that buggies with horses must be used to carry coal from one part of town to another. There are no buggies and horses around anymore, right? So the decision made previously would have been an unworkable precedent because the circumstances have changed. The precedent set previously is no longer applicable. Or a badly reasoned precedent. And from what I read, this has become more and more recently in the Trump administration, a part of the reason for overturning stare decisis. Okay, quick discussion. How does the doctrine of stare decisis balance the need for legal stability with the need for flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances? How should it balance this need? Any comments? In your view, should the court have the flexibility to overturn Roe versus Wade? Should it have the flexibility to overturn Brown versus the Board of Education? What do you think?
Well, I think those two in particular, I mean, we've already kind of seen that, but I'm just wondering if a different example were like, say, in voting rights, if, the Supreme Court decided that everybody only could vote if you went to the voting polls between the hours of 10 and 12 on this one particular day,
Right.
and then
Right.
there was no vote by mail, there was no early voting, there was nothing like that, but everybody had to go and to one particular spot as opposed
Yes.
to different precincts. That's an impossible kind of thing. So yes, it would grant stability, but it would be so bizarre and hard to put that into place. But then, somebody could say, well, people can still vote. We're not taking away that right to vote. It's just we're making it so damn hard. Nobody's, very few people can vote.
Yes. Right.
I don't know if that really is relevant to this question or not, but I just happen to think.
Yeah. I mean, that voting rules can be changed based on changing circumstances. Either now we have electronic voting in some cases, can transmit results. Now we have Indian reservations that are remote from voting places. It's very expensive to have people on Indian reservations vote because they are remote and in difficult places to move over with transportation. Should we save the money and disenfranchise them? I mean, all of this I think is relevant. Yes, Susie, is your hand up?
Yes, it is. I think that you had a good example previously. I think that, yes, there should be flexibility. Times change. I mean, there will become a time when someone just mentioned AI would be allowed to be used as evidence or as a summary, or it's already happening. So it's just gonna but our times change very, very rapidly. I think that as far as the league is concerned, it's, are we gonna limit then? Like, are they gonna take away the women's right to vote? It's not off the table, I don't think. And I guess I just need to say at this point or some point, I don't know if this covers, but the Senate blocked a president from nominating a Supreme Court justice. Something's got to be said. If we're going to talk about this, something's got to be said there, because the Senate's not in charge. The president should have been allowed to nominate, and they would have had to vote, and they could say no, but that blocking, that made it partisan right there. And that, I don't know, I don't hear anything here about that, but that was wrong.
That has been addressed, Susie. We only picked two of the issues that the league will be dealing with. One of them had to do with term limits, and there was a discussion of making sure that that presidents could not usurp the right to appoint Supreme Court justices, that their terms would renew. It was suggested at 18-year intervals. And you might want to go through the documentation on the LWVUS website. And I think you'd be fascinated by what you read in that policy document, because I think it addresses some of the concerns that you're raising.
Okay.
Yeah, don't know that you'll be happy with what you read there, but it has been attempted. Yeah, Ross, and then we'll flip over to Mary
Yeah.
Kate.
So in the stare decisis, in the Brown versus the Board of Education, that was a case where the previously decided law was limiting opportunities for people or rights of people. So they made it like a federal thing. And I think it was right to not follow the precedent that had been set. Where in Roe versus Wade, they did the exact opposite. They took a right that was made available to every woman, especially, might have been men who needed that right too, to have access to reproductive freedom, and sent it back to the states. And so I think in one case they didn't follow their own rules, so to speak, that this had been decided. it was made available to everybody, and they threw it out and then made it more restrictive because they knew by sending it back to the states that would restrict it. And, I just think that when you think about it, it should be, looked at the law in terms of where we are right now in our country. But I know when you looked at those terms that you sent, I know that there are people who say it should mean exactly what it meant when it was written 700 or 250 years ago, but we don't know what people meant at the time. And they're not, they could not even envision a world like the one we live in. So I just think it was a little bit of gamesmanship. So.
Yeah. Can anybody argue with that? Okay. All right. If now it's important that we go on to see how are we going to work together to respond to LWVUS. That's what these next two slides are about. So Mary Pat, I'll turn this over to you.
Sure. So next week we'll have our consensus meeting, and that's a 90-minute meeting. And we will address the 12 consensus questions that all chapters who go through this process are responding to. We will then, 4 of those questions cover basic principles outlined in the scope of the study. And the remaining ones deal with more specific aspects, issues, sort of working with the federal judiciary. Our league has decided to use a process of where we are on consensus by using something called FIST to 5, which is, you can see on the right here, sort of where do you fall on the question or the statement and, the discussion that we've had. And we use this not as a democracy vote kind of thing, but it's really to just take the temperature of the room so that we're clear when we go to fill out the survey, that we're capturing really what the gestalt of the room is, and of both of the groups that are going to have this discussion. So Carol mentioned going to the federal judiciary page on the US website, and it is a bear to find. So what it is you go to the lwv.org and then go to League Management, which is at the very bottom of the page, and then navigate to Advocacy and Litigation, and there you will find a page for the Federal Judiciary Study. And it has all of the documents. It includes the consensus questions. It covers the gamut. But before we do that, I want to take a couple minutes and have us practice the FIST to 5 process here. So I have, if you want to go to the next slide, Carol. So this is the consensus statement that we would have discussion about, and it is essential for Michelin-starred restaurants to use organic products. And how you're going to do this, I'm going to launch a poll. And you are able to respond with 5, I'm fine with this. 4, I have minor issue, which can be worked out later, but you can live in support with this. Minor issues that might be resolvable, but I'm not able to support at this time. I have major issues, or I can't let this decision go forward. So if you just pick one. Somebody out there hasn't voted. Okay. I'm gonna share the results with you. So you can see that we are right in the middle area. Minor issue that can be worked out, minor issue that maybe doesn't. So we might then have some conversation. Well, what are those issues? What of how would you change this statement? So thoughts, comments on this process?
Well, so if somebody comes in at a fist and, you know, or it's like half our fisted and half our five, I mean, that's a big spread. And
Right.
so that takes a lot of discussion, I would guess, to get to even something in the middle there.
Right.
And does that mean that that statement has to stand, or could it be totally thrown out, or like you said, you kind of you know, said that it could be
So what would happen is we have the option of having strong consensus for, moderate consensus for, moderate consensus against, strong consensus against, or no consensus. So we would, in that situation, we would say there's no consensus. But then we also have the ability, we have 100 words that we can then say, here's the context around our response. So Carol and I will take all of the notes and comments, because we will be taking those notes in our meeting, and we'll synthesize those, come up with our comments, you know, because we've got the two groups to go, and then synthesize them, complete that to the best of our ability, and we will then send that off. So you would see, so that then becomes part of the bigger 700 and some chapter consensus that they will then use to move forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I just want to add, Roz, I see you, but I'm just going to jump in for a minute. But because we'll have a 90-minute meeting, and because these are big topics, and we could talk about them for years and still not come to either consensus or what we want in our 100 words, we're going to be time limited in the amount of time that we spend on each question. And if at the end of the time we haven't reached consensus and we have different viewpoints as to why, we're going to make our best effort to document those viewpoints in the 100 words. So it's going to be both, have we reached consensus, and within the time that we have to do that.
So I want to make sure we respect your time. We're a couple minutes over. Don't forget, if you haven't registered for one of the 90-minute sessions next week, please do so. It's on the website, and we will see you again. And most of all, thank you. Elena has
yeah. And I don't know, I think maybe Roz had a question too, and then I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry,
okay.
Roz.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just curious about, so we will get the statements, we will discuss them, and then do what we just did, the fist to five. And if in our group, there, like in our little sample question, we had two different groups that fell into some, so as a whole group for us, do we just have to all agree on one? Or we can have some of us take one position and some of us take another position, and that just gets reported to the to the US, you know, to the group that's studying it. I guess I need clarification on that process.
Yes, it will be. My guess is that, you know, I'm just guessing. I don't think we're going to all vote the same way on many of these questions. I just don't. I mean, we have lots of diverse viewpoints. And I think the value that we give to LWVUS is what I call nuance. when we explain our hesitations or differing points of view in those 100 words to the best of our ability, we're giving us insight into our thinking about these issues. And that's probably the most valuable thing we can do. Consensus is not the goal here. Feedback is the goal.
Okay, thank you.
Elena?
Elena?
Susie had her hand up first.
Okay.
Susie?
Sorry, it's taking me a minute to unmute.
All right.
You picked these times, March 20th, and I meant to try to catch up with you at the leadership thing. I'm traveling on the 20th. I'm going to try to make the 5:30 from my hotel, assuming the Wi-Fi works and I can get in and all of that. But is there some other option, some other day, the following week? I don't know. It's very restrictive for someone. It's Manatee County's week to be away. So anyway, I maybe you could consider a different day and another week as an option. That's all I wanted to say. I'm gonna try to make it to 5:30. If I'm not there, it's because I can't get on Wi-Fi and get in.
That, Carol and I have talked about this, and I think we won't know until next week, but we may decide that, well, let's put one more day out there. Because we're also under a time constraint of having to have all the information synthesized, and that has to be done by the middle of April. So let's see what I'm going to say is let's wait and see, with an understanding that we've actually already considered, do we need to hold a third one in case there's more people that want to, that haven't been able to.
Well, people may not be signing up because they know they can't participate on March 20th. So you may not be getting people for this session which I almost didn't sign up for, because if you can't do one, you're not supposed to do the other. Anyway.
Well, this one was first, and mainly because we wanted to be able to get through this process so we could focus on really just.
No, I understand. I totally understand all of it. I'm just saying I don't know how many people responded, but hopefully there's enough to make it at least seem like a consensus of Sarasota. Thanks.
Thank you. Elena, your turn now.
I just wanted to say thank you. This was a tremendous amount of work to put this together. It was very well done, and I do appreciate the time and effort and all of that. And my question is, are we going to see the 12 questions ahead of time, or are they just going to be thrown at us on that day?
That's a good question. I have no objection to sending them out, Mary Pat.
No, me either.
Yeah.
And in fact, I can have Nancy post them. If that would be helpful, post them on our local site so you don't have to go and try and find it on the US site. But I can also send them out by email.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize they were on the US site, but so
Yeah.
So thank you.
Or even just the link, like you gave us the path, that if you could send that would be nice.
Let me
And
Joyce.
Yes. Mine kind of follows up with the discussion with Susie, and like Elena, I do want to thank you, ladies. This is excellent. I'm only wishing that more would participate. My concern is the amount of feedback you're going to get from our chapter. Do you feel it's sufficient to really judge it as a consensus?
yes, a consensus of the people who participate is
How many? Yeah,
I-
how many participants will there be in total?
14 from what's been signed up. But Joyce, I will comment that there are two goals of this study. One is responding to LWVUS, and the other is learning how to do a study within our league, making better presentations to you all, having a better sense of what times to schedule, all of that. And just speaking for myself, I was tremendously relieved that we could have a pilot project with a relatively small group, learn from you all so that the next time we do our study, we can do a better job. And I'm not sure we're ready to, I'm not sure we could do as good a job if all 300 people decided to come as we can with a small group that we can work with and learn from.
Well, I would have hoped that there would have been at least 30 to 50 people out of our, what, 400, what is our membership, 300 and some, Elena? That we would have had more than just 14 participating because of the judiciary study and the importance of that. And my thought was maybe if these questions would be sent out to the general membership, as it might elicit some more interest in participating in this initial. I know it's tonight, isn't it? And you're not offering another initial session. Is that correct?
We are recording it, and people who were not able to come to the first session are welcome to read the materials to get ready for session 2. But we are requiring that, quote, homework, the reading assignments, be done before we get opinions from the group. So I would not like to send out the questions without the reading assignments and knowing that people have the background, so we're all coming from a common place.
So what you're saying is it would not be to your interest to send out the questions, requiring, of course, people honestly saying that they did go through the recording and studied it. My concern is just to have this so small a number participating in the judicial study. That's all, because I think this is historical, and it is. I don't know how much outreach there was. I mean, what I got from participating probably was not enough to elicit my interest if I weren't really, really focused on it and a board member. And I would be concerned with trying to get some more people participating in this in whatever way possible.
Okay. Joyce,
Thank you.
would you be willing to lead an effort then to have people look at the materials, read them, and participate in the second study? Maybe you could help us.
Well, the only way that I can see at this point is if the questions would would elicit interest. In other words, put those questions out. This is what we are going to have to respond or want to respond to the U.S. About our feelings, our consensus about this, and to see if that doesn't elicit more interest. With the, of course, can't think of the word right now, the requirement to make sure that you listen to the recording. I am personally going to send out to people that I know personally in the league and saying, please make an effort tonight. Can they still register?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay.
And I guess the other thoughts I have about this, and I really appreciate y'all hanging in here for the extra time, is that those who have interest are showing up or will listen to this. And that I think the US perspective on how much participation is adequate is based on those who are interested and able to participate.
Right.
And that there is fair amount of cross-section between the two sessions, that it is going to be somewhat representative of how, if we had all 300 members here. So
Okay.
I think there has to be a process. We need to trust a process, at least initially, until it bears us. But I also completely understand where you're coming from. I think to send out something like a survey to all the members and asking them to say, oh yes, I have this consensus and here's the comments. It might work. It's something I had considered initially, but I don't, without the discussion, you lose some of the richness.
I agree 100% on that. Yes.
Yeah.
There has to be the commitment to have the first session.
Yeah.
And here again, it's an element of trust, just like with the Supreme Court. We trust
Right.
that you have, heard the recording and are, applying what you've learned to your answer of the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. I've
You
said my bit. Thank you.
And it's been heard. Susie, you get the last word.
Okay, so maybe given those comments, what makes sense to me then is you could send out, the initial response and maybe from this learning from these 14 people and say, okay, so this is the league, this is the information we got back. If